Hey guys, tonight we're unlocking one of history's least glamorous schedules, one so boring, so repetitive, and so shockingly pious, it might make your last Zoom meeting look like Mardi Gras. Welcome to the world of the medieval monk. Tonight you'll discover what it was really like to live each day under the crushing weight of bells, bread, and relentless spiritual side quests. Before we lose ourselves in a world where the closest thing to a private moment is face planting in your Bible during matins, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But, only if you'd actually wake up at 2 a.m. to listen to Gregorian chanting. Drop a comment, tell me if you're in bed, on your couch, or hiding from your kids in the laundry room. Because monks never had laundry rooms, and I feel like that explains a lot. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that turbulent abbey white noise, and get comfortable. Maybe wrap yourself in a bathrobe for extra authenticity. Don't worry, it's comfier than a hair shirt. Let's ask the really important questions. What does a monk actually do all day? Did monks ever get bored out of their minds? What did they eat if not cold cereal at 10 p.m.? Is it true they woke up before dawn just to pray? And if so, how did they survive on less sleep than a modern mom of twins? Was there such thing as Monk Mondays? Or was every day equally blessed and exhausting? And what's the medieval equivalent of scrolling on your phone instead of doing chores? Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1253, inside a stone-walled cell the size of a parked Prius. You're a monk, you're extremely sober, and your first scheduled activity is, naturally, repenting for your dreams. Good luck. The bells are tolling in the darkness, and for some reason, your eyelids are already open. That's right. It's sometime around 2:30 a.m., which is barely even morning, and yet you're expected to spring from your straw mattress like a divinely motivated grasshopper. You shuffle through icy stone corridors, guided by nothing but moonlight and the faint hope there's maybe a crumb left on last night's bread. Welcome to Matins, the sleepwalking Olympics of medieval faith. There is a particular kind of camaraderie forged in the chill of a pre-dawn chapel, bonded not through chit-chat or cheer, but through the mutual unspoken understanding. None of us want to be here right now. The air is thick with silence, interrupted only by the shuffling of woolen slippers and the occasional suppressed sneeze that echoes like a cannon shot in the emptiness. Each monk, nun, or novice files to their accustomed place, aligning themselves into neat rows with precision that only comes from months and years of repetition. The surreal midnight stillness outside the stone walls stands in stark contrast to the quietly bustling activity within. The ritual of waking at such an ungodly hour isn't just a test of willpower. It's a deliberate design, a humbling exercise meant to remind you daily that no clock belongs to you. Time itself is a gift to be given back to God. It was believed that to rise before dawn was to meet God halfway, catching him as he knit the hems of the morning sky. Sleep, after all, was a temptation, and resisting it, an act of devotion. There is almost a competitive element. Who will be first to the chapel? Who will be caught yawning? The struggle between spirit and flesh plays out in a quiet contest of drowsiness and devotion. Inside the chapel, candles sputter against the gloom, throwing tall, wavering shadows of saints onto the high arches above. There is a sacred choreography here, as you kneel, stand, and chant in time with the others, voices weaving together a tapestry of ancient prayers. If you're lucky, muscle memory takes over, and your lips move while your mind lags a stanza or two behind. Some nights, your thoughts are lucid, the stinging cold in your joints, the roughness of your habit, the piercing clarity of hunger that arrives before the first crumbs of breakfast. On others, the lines between prayer and dream blur so thoroughly that you half expect the words to dissolve into soft snoring. Time, in these hours, is elastic. 10 minutes of chanting can seem to last an eternity, while sometimes the dawn creeps in so suddenly, you swear you missed the middle of the night. The only measure of progress is the gradual lightening of the world outside, filtering through stained glass in hesitant ribbons. As matins gives way to lauds, there is a faint sense of accomplishment. You have bested the darkness, held witness to another day's fragile birth. Your eyelids are heavy, but your spirit, somehow, is lighter. There is a humility in waking up before God does, a surrender to a routine greater than yourself, a willingness to be shaped by repetition. By the time the first tentative streaks of sunlight cross the chapel floor, the liturgy of sacrifice has already begun. Sleep is the first and most universal offering made on the altar of faith. And while the beds back in the dormitory beckon, promising fleeting moments of warmth and comfort, you know the day's rhythm is only just beginning. To the outsider, this midnight rising seems cruel, a needless trial. But within the cloister, it becomes a quiet source of pride, a private badge of endurance. Each morning begun in darkness is a victory over the self, a step taken blindly but faithfully toward the light. Waking up before God does is less about boasting some supernatural resolve and more about participating in a centuries-old mystery, bearing witness, if only bleary-eyed, to the precious stillness that comes before the world fully wakes. As you fumble into your habit, you realize every thread is designed for penance, not comfort. Monastic robes are like burlap sack cosplay, but with extra guilt woven in. You cinch the itchy rope belt and wonder if anyone in history has ever looked dignified in a garment that doubles as a tablecloth. There's a special kind of humility in adorning yourself in what amounts to medieval athleisure, minus the leisure. The cloth is the color of humility, which, in practical terms, means it's engineered to beautifully showcase every soup stain, spilled coffee, and errant ink blot. Ever noticed how a monk never seems to worry about fashion? That's not wisdom. It's the quiet resignation that nothing in the robe family is going to make you look or feel fabulous. But within these time-worn fibers is a philosophy. When you spend your days swaddled in discomfort, you'll have fewer distractions from higher thoughts. Or at least, that's the theory. In practice, your thoughts are mainly focused on how badly you want to scratch your shoulder, which is a spiritual trial worthy of its own chapter in the rule. Now, you might picture solemn monks in pristine robes gliding through ancient stone cloisters, but the lived reality is much closer to an eternal battle with awkward hemlines and the constant risk of tripping over yourself during morning prayers. Pro tip: always know where your feet and the nearest candle are at all times. Putting on the robe is a choreography all its own. First, you pull the garment over your head, making sure not to knock your glasses off again. Then, the rope belt, a symbol of poverty and restraint, and also your daily reminder that knots are harder to tie than they look in YouTube tutorials. There's the distinctive monastic shuffle, perfected over centuries, a direct result of loose hems and billowy sleeves conspiring to make you walk like an extra in a medieval parade. If you think the discomfort ends at the fabric, think again. There's the psychological component. Robes are democratically unflattering. In a society that spends vast amounts of energy trying to project confidence and style, here is a uniform that demands the exact opposite. Everyone is reduced to the same amorphous woolen silhouette. There's a kind of freedom in surrendering to this. After the first dozen self-conscious days, you simply stop caring. Hair day, bad day, thunderstorm. The robes got you equally covered, which is both blessing and curse. Yet, in this sea of beige and gray, subtle nuances bloom. Veterans will tell you how to distinguish between a new recruit, fumbling with his cowl, tripping over the hem, the "I've accepted my fate" intermediate, robe perfectly askew, rope twisted at a rakish angle, and the old-timers, who move like the robes are part of their anatomy, gliding rather than shuffling, content as old house cats in wool blankets. Stories abound about the indignities of the habit. One novice recalls bravely kneeling for hours, only to discover, upon standing up, that a small mouse had commandeered his sleeve, equally happy with the free real estate. Others whisper about the belt dilemma, tie it too loose, and you'll spend your day hitching up your wardrobe, too tight, and you risk unintentional penance in the lunch line. Ironically, over time, these robes become oddly comforting, not in a literal sense, but as a kind of badge. They say, "I am committed. I have endured trials by linen. I have learned to ignore an itch for 6 hours straight." When everyone's equally encumbered, hierarchy dissolves. Underneath, you're all just souls in various shapes of potato sack, shuffling together toward enlightenment, or simply the next meal. So, the next time you see a monk serenely passing by, remember, beneath that placid exterior is someone who has mastered the fine art of moving, meditating, and maybe even contemplating eternity while wearing the least forgiving garment known to man. That, my friends, is the real discipline. Now you're packed into the chapel with 30 other sleepy monks, chanting prayers in Latin you barely understand. The acoustics are beautiful, but unfortunately, Gregorian chant is not a genre that makes staying awake easier. Your stomach grumbles. Your mind wanders. Is this what enlightenment means? Technically, Matins is meant to prepare you for spiritual battle, arming you with psalms and the wisdom of the ancients for whatever temptations the day might bring. But as the choirmaster drones, Domine, labia mea aperis, you find yourself engaged in a far less epic battle, against your own eyelids. The hymns tumble out, half-formed, echoing off the stone arches like a sleep-deprived lullaby. You steal a glance at Brother Stephen, who seems to be asleep with his eyes open. A minor miracle, given the relentless, hypnotic repetition of the verses. It's easy to romanticize these scenes, shrouded in candlelight and mystery. Popular imagination casts this hour as mystical, even transcendent, a sacred rendezvous with the divine. But the reality, as you quickly learn, is something closer to spiritual sleepwalking. The monks are here, but not quite here, some staring blankly ahead, others locking their knees to prevent a collapse, all determined to survive until the blessed syllables Benedicamus Domino signal temporary release. As your lips stumble over the Latin, your mind drifts. You consider how strange it is, this nightly liturgical karaoke, in which everyone knows the tunes, but few seem emotionally invested. Not that you blame them. 3 a.m. is a time for foxes and night watchmen, not spiritual fireworks. Sometimes, when the music swells just so, you almost feel the presence of something greater. Almost, but not quite. Usually that moment is interrupted by the realization that you've been singing the wrong verse for the past minute, and nobody appears to have noticed, or cared. A faint clatter from a dropped hymnal becomes a momentous event, briefly rousing everyone from their haze. Eyes blink awake, faces look guilty, and then, sheepishly, everyone burrows right back into the melody. It's oddly comforting. This gentle communal struggle through the valleys of fatigue, everyone just a little bit lost together. You wonder how the monks have kept this up for centuries, and what compels them to do so, given how tempting their beds must feel just now. You start to notice subtle acts of rebellion. A foot shuffles quietly. A head nods forward, then snaps back up, desperately trying to stay awake. Occasionally, a particularly resourceful monk will find a spot to lean against, eyes fluttering shut for a blessed 30 seconds before the prior's hawk-like gaze sweeps the room. The small victories in this place aren't epic revelations or supernatural ecstasy. They're surviving the hour without embarrassing yourself. And yet, despite its monotony, Matins does have its moments. Every so often, the harmonies converge in an unplanned moment of beauty, the ancient words lifting above the grogginess and filling the darkness with something genuine, if fleeting. For a moment at least, you understand you're not just reciting lines, but joining a thread unbroken for centuries, a human chain forged in song and half-conscious devotion. As the prayers wind down, your body aches for sleep, but your mind feels oddly cleansed, as if the fatigue itself has scoured something loose inside you. When you finally file out into the still, black corridor, you realize the point of Matins isn't simply to praise or petition some distant god, it's to bear witness together to the strangest truth in monastic life. Sometimes, the most profound spiritual practice looks and feels a lot like stubborn, holy exhaustion. In the end, as you shuffle off toward your cell with 30 other would-be mystics, you think, maybe, just maybe, enlightenment really does begin at 3 a.m. Bleary-eyed, off-key, and surrounded by fellow travelers in the dark. After Matins, there's a blessed sliver of quiet, a brief return to your cell, where you're supposed to meditate, not nap. The difference, frankly, is semantic. You try to focus on the mysteries of life, but really, you're just negotiating with your eyelids. You lower yourself onto the cold wooden bench, its surface already familiar to the shape of your exhausted body. The candle sputters from the corner, casting shadows that climb the wall and seem for a moment to curl into soft quilts. Silence thickens around you, both comforting and accusatory, as if daring you to succumb to gravity. You close your eyes for a moment, just one, you tell yourself. The mysteries require contemplation. The eyelids demand negotiation. Two forces swirl in uneasy compromise. At first, you try all the classic techniques, the ones your novice master demonstrated. Straighten the spine, lengthen your breath, hold the prayer beads loosely, but with intent. Recite another round of Kyrie Ellison. Each repetition, meant to draw you deeper into divine presence, instead seems to rock you gently closer to unconsciousness. Your thoughts flicker. One moment, pondering the nature of humility. The next, a vivid, near hallucinatory vision of eating bread straight from the oven, still steaming. You blink awake so quickly you almost fall off the bench. You are not alone in this struggle. If you were to creep down the chilly corridor, you'd spot other monks wobbling in similar states, some cross-legged on the floor, some clutching their knees to keep their spines from bending. There's a universally understood choreography to this communal sleep deprivation. Someone coughs, another shifts on the straw mattress, and a third gently snores, only to rouse a split second later with a furtive glance. Who noticed? Every so often you catch yourself drifting entirely beyond earthly concerns, not in the mystical, cloud-riding sense, but in that dream state where reality slides sideways. Maybe you see your mother's face in the candle flame. Perhaps you imagine a garden you knew as a child, dew still fresh between the rows of beans. The ancients spoke of visions. You suspect they were simply very, very tired. To stave off complete collapse, you turn inward, scanning the dark running commentary of your own mind. "Awake, soul! Be vigilant," you whisper, half scolding, half pleading. You think of the saints. How did they do this, night after night, without comfort or caffeine? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they too bargained with sleep, promising, "Just 5 more minutes, then I'll really get to the divine stuff." Minutes pass. Your mind ebbs and flows between lucidity and sleep. Time contracts, then stretches. Sometimes you're startled by how much has slipped by. Did you lose a minute or a year? Not that it matters. The order of hours is owned by the bell, not the body. The call to lauds is your salvation and your curse. On the one hand, the ordeal of meditation is over. On the other, you're now expected to rise, line up with the others, and chant as if you've been awake since creation. You straighten your robe, rub your face, and hope no one notices your red eyes. As the bell tolls, you feel both gratitude and a faint sense of defeat. Maybe tomorrow you'll stay awake through the whole meditation, or maybe, just maybe, you'll master the ancient art of sleeping with your eyes open. In this way, the silence of the cell is less a stage for spiritual enlightenment and more a proving ground for endurance. The line between holy focus and drowsy surrender thins with every tick of the oil lamp. And somewhere in the blurring boundary, you discover a strange kinship with all those monks who came before you, the weary, the watchful, and the ones who, even now, are probably napping under the guise of meditation. At sunrise, everyone gathers for another round of prayers. The sun peeks through stained glass windows, illuminating tired faces and drooping eyelids. Welcome to Lauds. It's like a sunrise yoga class, but nobody gets to wear leggings. Picture this: the monasteries, stone halls echoing with soft footsteps and the cooing of pigeons who think they own the place. Sleepy monks shuffle in lines, clutching their prayer books with the dedicated weariness of people who have been startled awake by bells that sound suspiciously like the world's most persistent alarm clock. If you ever wondered how many people can recite psalms while barely conscious, Lauds has you covered. The answer is all of them. Nobody is kidding themselves that the praise in this morning ritual is all spontaneous. After all, it was invented long before the invention of coffee, and that is simply cruel. There's something oddly comforting, though, about knowing that generation after generation has paused just before the workday to acknowledge the awkward glory of sunrise. The faces may change, the world outside might get louder or quieter, but inside, the rhythm is the same. Prayers, psalms, and maybe, just maybe, a yawn disguised as a solemn breath. Lauds, literally meaning praises, is a time when the community collectively nods in the general direction of hope, often while holding back a sneeze or a snarky remark. In theory, it's a liturgical latte, meant to give you an energetic spiritual lift, even when your brain still wants to hit snooze. No one said devotion was glamorous. When you're standing there, swaying slightly on your feet, you realize faith is less about spectacular epiphanies and more about just showing up, every morning, with everyone, even when you'd rather still be horizontal. Sometimes Lauds feels like theater, old drama, minor roles, same cast every day. But there's a magic in the repetition. The Psalms crackle with ancient poetry, imagining the world freshly made. The heavens declare the glory of God, someone drones, and you squint at the rectangle of light inching across the flagstones. Maybe that's the glory, or maybe it's just sunrise and you forgot to close your window last night. Either way, the text insists there's something to notice, and before you know it, you're catching glimpses of it. Dust motes, little galaxies spinning in the shaft of gold sunlight. Of course, there are always that handful of overachievers in the front row, faces upturned as if the Holy Spirit might descend directly upon them before breakfast. The rest of the congregation negotiates the line between reverence and sleepwalking, a delicate balance. A chorus of voices rises together, not always in perfect harmony, but with an unmistakable sense of, we're in this together. There's a comfort to the communal mumble, the realness of human limitation. The sun doesn't wait for anyone to wake up. Lauds is when you try to catch up, and, inevitably, someone forgets a line. A psalmist stumbles, books flip hurriedly, pages whispering a kind of liturgical panic. The choir leader, undaunted, brings them back on track. There's a little democracy in it all. Nobody does lauds perfectly, but everyone does lauds. Somehow, these imperfect offerings stack up, day after day, like blocks slowly building a cathedral from the inside out. By the time lauds ends, the sun is firmly above the horizon, the world is awake, and the prayers dissolve into the ordinary business of living. It's not about making every morning holy. It's more like declaring in your own stumbling way that maybe, just maybe, the day ahead is worth facing together. And if you still want that coffee afterward, well, you've definitely earned it. Personal hygiene is basic at best. The nearby stream delivers water so cold it could wake the dead. You splash your face in an attempt at washing and spiritual alertness. Congratulations, you're awake, possibly because your soul has briefly left your body. There is a special clarity earned only when freshly shocked by glacial runoff at dawn. The world was smudgy just seconds before. Lazy dreams, tangled hair, and remnants of sleep clinging to your mind. Then you crouch by the icy creek's edge, cup your hands, and fling. It's not so much a gentle cleansing as it is a jolt, a baptism of discomfort. For the briefest moment, the entire forest seems to hold its breath with you. Your head throbs and your thoughts sharpen, as if the river, instead of rinsing away dust and grime, has instead scoured spiritual fog from your vision. You remember, with a hint of envy, the ease of city showers, predictable, warm, and packaged in eucalyptus-scented steam. Awakening in civilization is gentle, a slow gathering of self. Here, washing up is an abrupt negotiation with the universe. There's no pretending to sleepwalk through your morning when nature herself is involved. Nature has opinions, and today, she's yelling at you through sub-zero water molecules. You stifle a curse and try to focus on the positive. Invigoration, purity, the thrill of survival. Some ancient philosopher surely would have called this the vigorous renewal of the essential self. Of course, the external world mirrors the internal. The shock of the water has a way of stripping away pretense. Here, you aren't the polished professional, the social media avatar, or the collector of little daily victories and anxieties. You are a mammal startled awake by elemental cold, present in every nerve ending. In the silence after the rinse, you sense your pulse in your temples and fingertips. For all the rituals of self-improvement we chase, this is the rawest, most unfiltered version. The universe chirping, "You're alive, feel it." You wonder if spiritual awakening always demands discomfort. The monks who meditated barefoot on mountain peaks, the yogis who fasted in chilly caves, they must have felt this same acute presence, born of bodily extremity. The physical sensation burns away the mental cobwebs. Here's something you notice. After the initial agony, there's a pure, humming alertness. The stream gurgles with the force of 1,000 tiny sermons. Accept the cold, and clarity follows. You aren't just clean, you're awake in a way that has nothing to do with caffeine or to-do lists. Maybe this is why pilgrimage sites, holy rivers, and sacred springs the world over share one common element: water cold enough to demand respect. Every spiritual tradition, somewhere in its lore, features water as the agent of renewal, transformation, and sharp, unignorable consciousness. The Arctic flush you get now, kneeling by a remote brook, bracing for the next splash, puts you in the company of seekers and hermits throughout the ages. As the shock leaches out of your skin, you find something almost meditative in the repetition. Rinse, shiver, breathe. You get used to the bite, eventually. Each morning, the ritual becomes a little less painful, a little more clarifying. Maybe there's a lesson in the cold water beyond just discomfort. A reminder that spiritual progress, like real cleanliness, rarely comes wrapped in comfort or convenience. With your face still tingling, you stand, water dripping, and survey the world. A little raw, a lot awake. There are easier ways to get clean, but nothing is quite so honest as the shock of cold water to the face, in body, and spirit alike. Whatever ghosts of comfort you left behind in the city are gone, replaced by a pulse steady with presence, and a reluctant gratitude for stream-fed awakenings. Breakfast arrives, if you can call a bowl of wheat gruel and an eternal crust of bread a rival. There's no coffee, no bacon, not even a berry to break up the beige. You eat in silence, contemplating the deep spirituality of cold mush. The first mouthful confirms your worst fears. This isn't a meal. It's a vague idea of sustenance, reminiscent of rain-soaked sawdust. The texture is best described as ambiguous. It slides across the tongue, offering no resistance, no reward, just a primordial blandness. You try not to think about the word slurry. Around you, others chew mechanically, resigned. Nobody is here for the flavor. The only seasoning is reflection. As you prod the crust of bread, a chunk so dense it could double as a modest home defense weapon, you realize that, in this place, excitement is left at the gates. Forget jam, forget butter. This bread is a study in plainness, a solid argument against the Renaissance. You consider how this might be the only scenario in which a person would pine for the exciting days of World War II rationing. You catch the eye of another breakfaster. There is a moment of silent solidarity. Yes, we too are survivors, but of what? The room itself does little to lift the mood. Pale light seeps in through narrow windows, illuminating the plain wooden tables, the humble crockery. There are no cheerful kitchen smells, no clatter of cutlery and laughter, just the quiet slosh of gruel being ladled and a faint, church-like hush. The air is perfumed with ancient porridge and resolve, and maybe the slightest hint of despair. You soon find yourself embarking on a mental adventure, for there's little to entertain the palate. You think of the breakfasts you've loved and lost, the sizzle of bacon, the tartness of marmalade, the cheerful effervescence of a café au lait. Here, each bite of porridge is a meditation, each chew a prayer for rain, or at least a scrap of cheese. You recall stories of ancient monastic breakfasts and find them faintly glamorous by comparison. Monks presumably had honey. By the time you're halfway through, the relentless sameness of the meal becomes oddly hypnotic. Is this how enlightenment begins? Is it possible to transcend the physical realm via the medium of flavorless starch? You watch a fellow diner try, valiantly, to create excitement by sprinkling a bit of salt, eyes narrowing in anticipation, only to deflate slightly when the result tastes merely of salty porridge. Still, there is camaraderie in this shared asceticism. A communal gloom, perhaps, but a communal one nonetheless. You ponder the purpose. Perhaps the porridge is meant not to fill, but to humble, to reinforce something about discipline, or gratitude, or the simple fact that you are still, in fact, alive. If nothing else, it sharpens the mind. Toward the lunch hour, you scoop another spoonful, reflecting on all the historic figures who ate similar breakfasts. Explorers, scholars, maybe prisoners. You suspect no one ever wrote poetry about gruel, or if they did, it was probably short. Breakfast ends as unceremoniously as it began. The bowls are gathered, the bread crusts stowed away. There's a sense of accomplishment simply for having endured. Maybe tomorrow will bring an apple slice, or a spice. But for now, bellies gently warmed and spirits thoroughly tempered, you file out with the others. In silence, of course, no one feels quite witty enough for conversation after such a beige affair. If nourishment can be measured in humility, this breakfast is a feast. If measured in pleasure, well, there's always lunch. Speaking at breakfast is forbidden. Every slurp and crunch echoes through the refectory like a sermon on restraint. If you drop your spoon, it's basically a cardinal sin. But, oddly enough, there's an art to this forced quiet. Lined up in long medieval rows, sleeves rolled and faces set, half determined, half still dreaming, we fall into a choreography as old as the stone vaults above us. No one makes eye contact. Eyes are fixed on bowls, plates, or somewhere in the vague middle distance, as if staring hard enough might conjure up a whispered permission to ask for the butter. It never does. Instead, small rebellions bubble just beneath the surface. Someone taps the table with a rhythmic finger. Over there, a foot bounces restlessly, sending ripples through polished wooden benches. All the little ways people wish they could speak but can't. It's amazing how expressive a raised eyebrow becomes when actual words are banned. To pass the salt is to communicate the subtlest message. I see you. I know you're struggling with that undersalted porridge. There's always the temptation to break the silence. Maybe something absurd happens. The jam packet explodes across the pristine linen, or someone's toast launches theatrically onto a neighbor's lap. Still, everyone holds steady, a bitten lip, sparkling eyes brimming with suppressed laughter. The rules are clear, not a word until the bell. It's a strange, quiet ballet, a discipline that feels both ancient and oddly intimate, and yet this hush creates its own kind of companionship. It's not camaraderie built on banter or shared jokes, but on a mutual agreement to endure together. We notice every detail of each other, the way someone folds a napkin, the careful precision of tea pouring, the soft sighs that signal the battle against early mornings. Our gestures become careful and deliberate, movements exaggerated, so there's no mistaking their intention. It's a reminder that communication isn't always verbal. Sometimes the loudest statements are the silent ones. The food itself becomes strangely important. With nothing to distract us, each bite is an event. The bread, dense, chewy, more fought with than eaten, is contemplated like a philosophical text. Is it good? Not really, but in the hush, it's all the world. Every flavor is sharper, every texture heightened by the backdrop of near-perfect silence. You remember this meal, years later, not because of what was said, but precisely because nothing was. When the bell finally rings, the spell is broken. A soft exhalation follows, a quiet gasp as voices awaken and tables shuffle. There's relief, but a lingering sense that something sacred just happened, something ancient and disciplined and slightly unnerving. The silence ends, but the shared experience remains, tucked quietly into memory alongside the echo of spoons and the stiff-backed etiquette that forced us, even just for a few moments, to listen harder. With our eyes, our hands, our hearts. What remains with you isn't just the taste of the food, or even the strange, strict peace of the silence. It's the realization that table manners, in this context, are less about forks and napkins and more about a communal act of self-control. Against the modern urge to fill every gap with chatter, we learn to sit with each other and ourselves in profound, resonant quiet. And maybe, just maybe, we come to appreciate the rare luxury of a meal where the only thing louder than a dropped spoon is the silent understanding passed between those who persevere, wordlessly, together. With morning prayers and breakfast complete, it's time for work. Monks are the OG multitaskers, gardening, sweeping, repairing fences, and copying manuscripts. If you've never milked a goat with a hangover from sleep deprivation, you're not getting the full experience. If you imagine that, living in a monastery was all incense, chanting, and the occasional robe adjustment, think again. The truth smells a lot more like compost and goat. The day's first task might find you hunched over stubborn garden rows, hands deep in earth still cold from dawn. These aren't modern hobbyist gardens either. The whole monastery runs on what the brothers can coax from the ground, so there's no skipping steps or calling in sick just because your spiritual battery is running low. Monks have always believed in the sanctity of labor, the idea that holiness isn't just found in lofty prayer, but in getting your tunic dirty. In the medieval world, this was almost revolutionary. While nobles measured worth in titles and property lines, monks carved out meaning with shovels and brooms. And as every novice quickly learns, every blister and splinter becomes a kind of silent prayer. Need a meditative exercise? Try pulling beats in silence, with only the ringing in your own ears for company. Every job in the monastery operates on this double track, totally practical, but always charged with a sense of deeper purpose. Sweeping the corridor isn't just about banishing dust. It's about making the house of God shine, however briefly, a way of saying, even in the corners, we care. Of course, the dust doesn't care back. There's always more. But monks take this as a metaphor for spiritual life. The cleaning is never complete. That's not failure. It's a process, repeated daily, that builds patience one speck at a time. Let's talk about animal chores, specifically cows and goats. Both offer ample opportunities for character development and comic relief. Those serene faces conceal a mischievous streak a mile wide. If you're picturing a bucolic scene of sun-dappled milking, adjust your expectations. More likely, you're dodging a goat's hoof in the ribs while praying silently that Brother Aloysius remembered to latch the pen. Meanwhile, the cows chew speculatively on your habit as you attempt to liberate a few precious streams of milk. It's messy, repetitive, and, on cold mornings, probably the only thing that keeps your hands from freezing solid. Everyone rotates through these chores, from the youngest novices to the abbot himself. There's democratic equality in the compost pile. Status, education, even piety, none of it exempts you from the universal truths of mud and manure. The monastery's daily routine is a reminder that spiritual loftiness begins at ground level, sometimes literally, with your boots caked in whatever the cows left behind. Then, just when you start fantasizing about running away to a quiet life as a hermit, someone reminds you of your duty in the scriptorium. Because farming and feeding livestock is just half the equation. The monastic community is also the medieval edition of the world's most persistent book club, preserving knowledge, one cramped, ink-stained letter at a time. The work is painstaking, requiring focus and endurance. There's elbow grease in more than one sense. Your arm aches after hours of careful scribing, and your mind soon finds the limits of its patience. But here's the paradox. As the monks labor, they insist this isn't just drudgery. Something profound grows between chores and prayer. There's dignity in the rhythm of daily work, a humility in each repetitive task. The physical routine becomes a form of devotion, an unspoken act of faith that the world is worth tending to, line by careful line, row by stubborn row. When the bell rings for midday prayer, the tools are laid aside, at least for now. Hands are scrubbed, usually, and boots thudded clean against stone. Yet whatever labor was done in the fields or stables lingers, a reminder that holiness is as much in the dirt under your fingernails as the words murmured in the chapel. Elbow grease, it turns out, is part of the sacred routine. Welcome to the scriptorium, the world's quietest, most meticulous office. Here, you'll copy religious texts with a quill and ink. Forget carpal tunnel. One sneeze, and you're starting over. Carpal tunnel hasn't been invented yet, but it's definitely being beta tested. Let's set the scene. It's the 12th century. You walk into a stone-walled chamber, maybe a little damp, definitely not well ventilated. The only sound a steady chorus of scratching quills and the occasional monk mumbling a prayer for steady hands. The atmosphere is less cubicle and more meditative endurance challenge. Each desk is lined with precious parchment, so rare that even minor mistakes risk excommunication, or at least some serious side-eye from Brother Benedictus. Your job? Copy the sacred word with all the accuracy of a medieval photocopier. There's no toner to replace, but plenty of ink. Everywhere. The scriptorium is half holy workspace, half perpetual finger-painting class for adults, judging by the state of everyone's sleeves. The first commandment, thou shalt not smudge. Every finished page is a work of art. The illuminated letters, those big fancy capitals, aren't just for show. They're a highlighter, bookmark, and a flex, all at once. Some monks spent weeks laboring over a single shimmering gold G. These embellishments transformed the process from rote reproduction to devotional craft. The better your calligraphy, the closer you must be to God, at the very least, closer to holding on to your job. But this isn't just any office environment. There's no Employee of the Month plaque, just the hope of getting through the Gospel of Mark before arthritis sets in. Lunch break, only if you can tune out the sound of rumbling stomachs and ignore the tempting image of a roast boar drawn in the margins by a mischievous predecessor. The only ergonomic innovation is the wooden writing slope, angled to reduce slouching and, theoretically, existential despair. And let's discuss quality control. Finished manuscripts require painstaking proofreading by the head scribe. The process goes something like this: check, recheck, find a single errant ink blot, weep quietly, then hand it back for revision. The pressure is real, especially with the abbot's eagle eye hovering nearby to make sure Matthew 5:9 doesn't accidentally become Matthew 5:99, where, presumably, the peacemakers inherit not the earth, but a herd of particularly cranky sheep. Still, the scriptorium functioned as the medieval engine of knowledge preservation and transmission. Here, copies of the Bible, ancient philosophers, medical treatises, and even the odd recipe for ink stain removal were painstakingly reproduced and spread throughout Europe. Without this quiet industry, most of classical learning, and more than a few saucy monastery gossip columns, might have disappeared entirely. And let's not forget the social scene. Silent, yes, but not joyless. Coded doodles and margins, the odd subtle critique of the monastery cook, even cheeky depictions of fellow monks with exaggerated noses, all hidden among the pristine uncials of sacred texts. The margins of a manuscript could be a surprisingly lively place, the medieval equivalent of a group chat where you hope the boss never scrolls up. By the time the hand cramps subside and you put the finishing touches on your latest chapter, you've not just preserved spiritual guidance for the ages. You've inscribed a little piece of yourself into history. It's laborious, repetitive, and ink-stained, but for 1,000 years, the scriptorium was as crucial to civilization as any invention since. It was the medieval laser printer, slow, beautiful, and prone to the occasional catastrophic paper jam, often caused by a passing cat. So, next time you hit print, spare a thought for your monkish predecessors, whose Codral PS was a careful sweep of the Sanderac powder and a quick prayer for mercy. In the scriptorium, every page is a testament, not just to faith, but to patience, perseverance, and the original art of manual backup. Mid-morning means a brief nibble, a small reprieve with maybe an apple. You eat it while staring at a wall and pretending you're not jealous of the apple's freedom. You didn't always eat this way. Back in another life, snack time was a gleeful pause, a handful of almonds, a flaky croissant from the cafe, or that forbidden but somehow always available chocolate chip cookie a colleague had brought in for the team. There was casual conversation and the backdrop hum of a workplace finding its rhythm. Snack time was not an act of surrender, but a celebration. Now, the moment is more monastic. That apple is a punctuation mark in a paragraph you no longer remember writing. The ritual begins at 10:38 a.m., though no alarm sounds for it. Your body, by this point, is a slave to the clockwork of necessity rather than the pleasures of anticipation. You step away from your makeshift, a workspace, just for a second, just to peel yourself from the spreadsheet or the endless ping of digital requests. The kitchen is no longer a source of options. It's a station, one apple, chosen with the lackluster deliberation of someone who knows there are no discoveries waiting. The crinkle of the fruit's skin is the loudest sound you've heard all morning. It fills the stillness like applause in an empty theater. You lean against the counter, or maybe you sit quietly at the edge of your own bed, glancing out a window at nothing in particular. Others might imagine remote work means snacking at leisure, wandering the pantry with the extravagance of someone whose commute is a memory. But with each quiet bite, you wonder about the freedom you gave up for this ritual of efficiency. The apple is emblematic, a compact symbol of trade-off, a small and noble martyr. You notice, perhaps for the first time, how unceremonious this transition has been. There is no one to chat with, no break-room banter about the best way to slice fruit. Even the idea of sharing is gone. Snack time is solitary, governed by your own discipline, and whatever faint guilt remains about empty calories. You find yourself recalling those snack carts that would roll through the office at precisely the right moment, laden with choices purely designed to make you smile. Here, at home, snack time is stripped of such frivolities. It becomes utilitarian, a pit stop for fuel rather than an indulgent pause. Sometimes you let your mind wander. You remember the days when you'd sneak away for a quick treat, almost as if you were participating in a collective rebellion against the relentless march of productivity. Laughing with a friend, debating the virtues of dark chocolate versus milk, you would return to your desk, feeling, however briefly, recharged. Now, in the quiet, you realize that the act of snacking was never about hunger. It was about human connection, about permission to be less than perfectly efficient. Your mind circles back, reluctantly, to the present. The last bite of apple is always the most meaningful. Will you savor it, or just finish so you can cross snack off the mental to-do list? The answer shifts daily, depending on how hard the day has been so far. Sometimes you feel a pang of guilt for even granting yourself this small reprieve. The apple core lands in the trash with a soft, decisive thud. A minor end to a minor moment. But lately, every small thing counts more than it should. Snack time, once an unnoticed luxury, is now a quiet exercise in restraint and nostalgia. Yet, within its modest frame, it offers a fleeting chance to step outside the constant demands, if only briefly. In that silent pause, there is a hope, a memory of shared spaces, shared laughs, and forgotten freedoms that you carry with you, like the echo of a break room somewhere just out of reach. Outside, you're working in the gardens, fields, or barns, growing. Food for the abbey, sunburns and mud or spiritual experiences. Every blister is a step closer to enlightenment, or possibly tetanus. In truth, the rhythm of manual labor is the heartbeat of monastic life. The monastery's fields are not merely plots of land. They are living testaments to patience, humility, and the quiet power of persistence. Each morning, as the sun stretches its golden fingers across the sky, you gather your tools, rusty wooden-handled spades and the world's bulkiest watering cans, and prepare to wrestle harvest from the stubborn earth. Monks don't need CrossFit. They have weeding, compost turning, and the endless relay race known as helping Brother Thomas move those sacks of potatoes again. Yet, beneath the choreographed chaos of sweat and soil, a quiet alchemy unfolds. You discover the slow, steady beauty of growth. The first tender shoots poking through the ground are cause for discreet celebration. Discreet in the monastic sense. A slightly enthusiastic nod at morning prayers rather than a stadium wave. The garden, like your inner world, demands continual tending. Roots must be protected. Weeds, those persistent theological metaphors, are pulled before they choke out the peas. Tomato vines sag under the weight of their own ambition. In the heat, your mind wanders, not to emails or to-do lists, but to the miracle of dirt and sunlight, how every tiny seed contains a whole green cathedral. Your hands, soft when you arrived, soon bear the nicks and calluses of the trade. Manual labor, you learn, is not simply a tax on your body. It's a curriculum for the soul. There is a kind of meditative clarity that arrives as you stack firewood or muck out stalls. You stop resenting the ache in your lower back and start treating it as a prayer, an offering of the ordinary. Some monks maintain a running tally of blisters, quietly proud of their battered digits. When Brother Aloysius appears with fresh bandages and salt-of-the-earth advice, rub some calendula on it or just offer it up. You begin to understand the unique language of caring forged in the fields. Of course, not all forms of spiritual enlightenment smell like compost. The barn is a different classroom altogether. You confront animals who operate on a different, more mysterious theology. The cows are serene, like contemplatives at vespers, while the chickens are anarchists, determined to disrupt any sense of order you might bring. Early on, you chase a wayward hen through the bean patch, reflecting, thanks to a sudden tumble, on both gravity and the transience of all things. Eventually you learn humility is a byproduct of chasing livestock. In the thick of summer, as you hoe rows beneath a relentless sun, something unexpected happens. Fatigue, rather than breaking you, draws you closer to the rhythm of the earth and the pulse of community. Laughter rises easily, not loud, precisely, but shared, like a secret handshake. Your fellow workers become teachers, students, and sometimes comic relief. Remember, one senior monk grins, the saints did their share of shoveling. By afternoon, you return indoors, earth under your nails, and gratitude in your bones. The abbey may not run on divine intervention alone, but also on the collective sweat and silent ambitions of its caretakers. You are no longer a visitor, but a conspirator in the holy mischief of cultivation. You realize that the divine heat is not just the temperature, but the warmth forged in effort, a quiet glow that seeps into your marrow and follows you from field to chapel, from sunrise to compline. It's here, in work's humble repetition, that you start to glimpse holiness, not in visions, but in armfuls of carrots, the simple order of neat rows, and the knowledge that every labor is, somehow, a prayer. Let me know if you'd like this expanded or adjusted in any way. No sooner has the sweat dried on your brow than it's time to assemble for prayers again. Midday prayers hit just as your stomach starts to grumble. You don't pray for a better meal. You pray for patience. The bell rings. Or perhaps it's just the usual call echoing down the halls, ushering everyone from their scattered tasks. There's a silent shuffle, one last furtive glance at the half-eaten bread or the bowl of lentils. The rules allow for no negotiation. Lunch, no matter how unsatisfying or meager, pauses, mid-bite, mid-thought, whenever midday prayers demand. It's an interruption that feels both mundane and monumental. Some mutter quietly, a few sigh in resignation, while others simply accept, as if obedience itself offers a kind of nourishment. You line up with the others, trying to center your mind. The room is warm, its air heavy with the sense of food, sweat, soap, and devotion. The midday sun smears the floor with rectangles of light, and it takes a few moments for your eyes to adjust after squinting at the brightness outside. As the prayer leader settles into his place, you steady your breathing, willing the rumbling in your stomach to quiet itself for the brief span of ritual. Words from ancient texts drift in the air, a rhythm and melody so familiar you could say them in your sleep. Sometimes your thoughts float, tracing the smells wafting from the kitchen, wondering if the stew would have more carrots today, or whether the cook would remember to add extra salt. In your hungriest moments, even the smallest variation in the lunch menu can take on outsized importance. But the prayers demand focus, a retreat from your hunger, a setting aside of all that pulls at your body. Here, in this collective pause, you join the ritual, each syllable a stitch holding your world together. Outside, the world carries on at its usual pace. Delivery carts rattle by. Somewhere, a vendor yells about fresh fruit. On the roof, birds flit and squabble, thinking only of their own midday meals. Inside these walls, however, time bends. You are suspended between the morning's labor and the promise of rest that comes with the evening. Your hunger, both literal and metaphorical, shapes your prayers. You offer up your discomfort alongside your words, hoping that, in some small way, your discipline will be enough. The prayer itself is not long, but returning from it sometimes feels like waking from a hazy, slow-motion dream. For a split second, you have forgotten your stomach, lost yourself in the drone and cadence of the liturgy. But soon enough, the spell breaks. The final words are said. Heads lift, shoulders drop, feet shuffle as the group disperses. You hurry back to your meal, if you're lucky enough to have one. Colder now, sometimes a little congealed, but still there. Some days the interruption sharpens your appetite. Food tastes richer, simply because it was withheld just a little longer. Other days, it's an annoyance. Another small reminder that your own needs will always come second to the demands of the structure around you. Yet, over time, the rhythm of these midday prayers becomes a part of you. The interruption is no longer disruptive. It's a moment to recalibrate, a hand gently placed on your shoulder, steering you back into alignment. In the grand orchestration of your day, it is a pause, a held note, a reminder. Sustenance comes in more forms than one. The lunch you return to is just as much shaped by the prayers as by the cook's hand. Hunger and patience, inseparable and necessary, carry you through, meal to meal, prayer to prayer. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments, examples, or a specific emotional emphasis. Lunch is usually stew, lentils, and the ever-present bread. If you're lucky, maybe some wilted greens. You eat with one eye on the abbot, hoping nobody notices you coveting Brother Thomas's slightly less stale portion. It's easy to romanticize monkish meals, simple, communal, an emblem of ascetic virtue. In reality, it's a test of endurance and polite deception. The bowls arrive steaming, that is, if you catch them in the first wave. There's a system, an invisible pecking order no one will admit exists. The abbot, of course, is served first. Then the oldest brothers. By the time the bowl lands in your hands, the steam is just a memory and the lentils are settling into a congealed brownish lull. Bread, sturdy enough to double as a doorstop, isn't a mere side. It's a challenge. Each bite is a test of dental fortitude and faith. faith that the next mouthful won't chip a tooth, or worse, incite the ire of Brother Elfric, self-appointed guardian of table etiquette. You break the crust in silence, fingers smarting, and dip it into the lentil stew. It's meant to soften. Often it only grows heavier, burdened with just enough broth to be soggy, but still fundamentally indestructible. Across the table, Brother Thomas seems perpetually blessed with the loaf that's almost soft, its edges, less lethal. You'd think monastic life would train you out of envy, but some days, watching Thomas cradle his bread like the host at Mass, all hope of sainthood feels miles away. The room fills with the shuffle and thump of wooden spoons and the occasional clatter when one escapes a tired hand. Conversation is limited, a murmur about scripture here, a stern look from the abbot dissuading anything bordering on levity. Even laughter sounds different in the refectory, half-swallowed, guilty, as if joy might curdle the lentils. But there are moments, brief and furtive, when hope sneaks in by way of an unexpected herb floating in the stew, a stray bay leaf, a whisper of garlic. These, you learn, are the silent rebellions of Brother Jonan, who tends the kitchen garden with covert optimism. Hope, like flavor, is rationed. But when it appears, it's all anyone can talk about for days afterward, in code. Did you notice something extra, brother? A certain freshness today, yes? Lunch, then, is more than a meal. It's a daily trial, yes, but also a secret society of small pleasures and shared privation. Each bite, of lentils that could be anything from subtly earthy to resolutely bland, of bread that seems to have aged alongside the monastery's oldest oak, is a lesson in patience. Or, perhaps, a lesson in the creative power of memory, since the stories you tell about lunch later always taste better than the actual thing. Sometimes you bite into a green stem that's barely wilted, a reminder of spring's eventual return. It's an edible metaphor, hope, slightly underdone, stubbornly refusing to blend in. These moments don't make the hunger vanish or soften the bread, but they do build a quiet resilience. Each spoonful is an act of return, to the table, to the season, to a community held together not by the quality of its meals, but by the willingness to keep showing up, bowl in hand, day after day. Oddly, it's not the food you remember on the hungry afternoons, but the way the light slants through the narrow glass, catching flecks of dust and making the unremarkable look quietly luminous. You remember the warmth of shoulders tucked close together, the silent understanding, the biting contrast between longing and gratitude. Lunch is stew, lentils, unyielding bread, and, on the best days, a side of uncooked hope. After lunch, it's confession or spiritual reading. The line for confession is suspiciously long, almost as if monks purposely queue for extra nap time while waiting for absolution. There's an unspoken etiquette to getting in the confession line early. The seasoned monks have claimed their strategic positions just after the last bite of bread, gliding up the aisle with the casual confidence of someone who's mastered the all-important art of looking busy while doing nothing. A few quietly grip their dog-eared prayer books, but most appear to be deep in what can only be described as some advanced meditative napping, eyelids fluttering, faces pointed heavenward, hoping the abbot interprets their stillness as piety rather than REM sleep. From behind the velvet screen, the muffled sounds of hushed confessions drift through the chapel. The confessor's voice is a steady hum, soothing, slightly monotone, punctuated by coughs and the occasional, distinctive sound of a monk trying not to snore. Some monks rehearse their confessions, whispering sins under their breath, as if prepping for a role in some monastic production. The internal debate over whether I coveted Brother Thomas's sandals is really worth mentioning, or if spiritual triage is necessary to keep things moving. Meanwhile, those assigned to spiritual reading offer a contrast. Heads bent over texts so dense that even the marginal notes look like a code designed to induce drowsiness. Here, sin is less about action and more about inattention. There is a clock somewhere in the chapel, but time during confession hour loses meaning, each minute stretched by anticipation, boredom, or, possibly, the existential crisis that comes with realizing your transgressions boil down to I daydreamed during lauds, or I accidentally watered the fig tree with holy water, again. The confessional turns into a kind of slow-motion relay race. The monk at the front disappears behind the curtain, a flurry of robe and sandals, and after a suspiciously long interval, returns, face serene, steps lighter. The next confessionee glances at the departing monk, calculating whether the glow of forgiveness is genuine or the result of a particularly satisfying nap behind the screen. Whispered rumors circulate. Brother Augustine's string of penitential rosaries is actually cover for an advanced breathing technique, and Father Lawrence has developed a legendary system for sorting his minor and major sins by syllable count, ensuring he never exceeds his confessor's patience. No one wants to be that monk, the one whose confession is so lengthy that 3 others leave the line and elect for spiritual reading instead. Outside the confessional, the mood is almost festive in its slowness. A few monks, thinking themselves clever, have brought thin cushions to ease the burden of penance. Others trade glances that say, "I'm next," except no one really wants to be next, for being second in line is as close as monastic life gets to prestige. At least once a week, the novice master must remind everyone that confession is not intended as a substitute for afternoon rest. Science may one day reveal that the most sacred silence is maintained not by reverence, but by the collective energy-saving mode initiated by a group of monks after lunch. By the time the bell rings, drawing confession hour to a close, the line is only slightly shorter than when it started. Some monks wander back to their chores, still clutching their litany of minor missteps, ready to try again the next day. And so, the great cycle continues. So many sins, so little time, and always just enough opportunity to sneak in a cheeky nap disguised as spiritual fervor. Brief rest is technically allowed, but sleeping too much is frowned upon. You perfect the art of holy dozing, which involves pretending to read while actually drooling on your psalter. Nobody's fooled, but everyone pretends. Back in the bustling medieval monastery, energy was a rare commodity, and the hours were long. The monastic day revolved around the never-ending cycle of prayers, chants, and chores. But humans have always found ways to sneak in a sliver of comfort, and the medieval monk was no different. Short naps, disguised as spiritual contemplation, became an unofficial art form. There's an unspoken code among monks. If someone falls asleep on their parchment, you gently clear your throat, not to wake them, but to alert others to look busy. It's a system rooted in compassion, or at least mutual self-preservation. The physical environment of a medieval scriptorium would not have supported lavish napping. There were no cozy recliners or plush pillows, only hard benches, straight-backed wooden chairs, and, if you were lucky, a half-decent cushion stuffed with straw. The only warmth came from hastily patched robes or the flickering breath of candlelight. But even so, after hours spent hunched over illuminated manuscripts or copying sermons, droopy eyelids were inevitable. You learn quickly to master the 40-second snooze, enough to revive your wits, not enough to get caught. The seasoned practitioners of holy dozing had refined techniques for nap camouflage, one hand on the quill, the other loosely gripping parchment, brow slightly furrowed, as if lost in silent theological debate. If questioned, you might mutter a Latin phrase about God's all-encompassing wisdom, and then resume, as if struck by divine inspiration, an everyday pageantry in the quiet lives of those dedicated to prayer. This creative approach to rest was not limited to the clergy. Across the medieval world, ordinary folk also adopted a pragmatic relationship with daytime sleep. In villages and bustling market towns, brief naps, often stolen between tasks, were viewed as a minor vice, on par with snagging an extra biscuit at dinner. You might see a blacksmith feigning deep contemplation by the forge, or a miller so still on his sack of grain, you'd wonder if he'd had a vision, only to be startled awake by a stray chicken. In noble houses, court officials were infamous for their afternoon lethargy, draping themselves over scrolls and ledgers in the drowsy sunlit hours. No matter your station in life, mastering the nap was a survival skill. Of course, there was a risk. Napping could draw the attention of an overzealous superior. Medieval rules were clear. Idleness was a sin. Chronic nappers could be assigned the least favored chores, such as scrubbing cloisters or hauling water for the kitchen. This was not the fate of the true holy dozer, who knew that discretion, not excess, kept one safe. One eye open, always, for the abbot's footsteps. Should you be caught enjoying a particularly syrupy dream, the response would be a gentle admonition and a thinly veiled smirk. After all, even abbots knew the temptation. Over time, holy dozing became not just a personal habit, but a shared understanding, a wink, a nudge, an inside joke linking generations. Monks might swap tales of legendary sleepers from years past, Brother Peter, fan of midday psalm-inspired slumbers, or Sister Agnes, who could nap upright with her eyes technically open. These became stories not of shame, but of solidarity. Every community needs its little rebellions, its gentle mockeries of rules too strict to survive reality. In the end, napping like a medieval pro wasn't just about sneaking a bit of rest. It was about navigating human needs within the structures of faith and duty. Behind the solemnity and ritual, there was always room for a smile, a secret nod, and a moment's peace, however brief. As evening falls, bells ring for vespers. Monks file into the nave, chanting once more in candlelit gloom. You start to suspect that Gregorian chant is just monks' way of making sure everyone else is also suffering. The sound is relentless, a rising and falling tide of solemn harmonies with no discernible beginning or end. The voices, low and unhurried, roll over the stone floor and into the arches above, gathering like mist. Though the words themselves are in Latin, unchanged for centuries, the meaning is secondary to the effect, a kind of sonic hypnosis. You glance around, the monks, heads bowed, seem immune to the monotony, absorbed in their ritual. You wonder if repetition breeds serenity through surrender, or simply numbs the mind into compliance. Time in the nave seems to stretch and bend. The outside world contracts to a single point. The flickering of candlelight on ancient walls, the coldness in the air, and the soft scrape of sandals on stone. There is nowhere to look but forward, nowhere to be but here inside the swelling chorus of voices. In a moment of rebellious clarity, you recall how different this is from the crisp, efficient worship services of home. No guitar strums, no hand claps, no PowerPoint lyrics. Just the endless undulations of melody as old as memory itself. Around the choir stalls, tourists have begun to wilt. Some fidget with brochures, others slip quietly out the side door, their expressions a blend of awe and silent calculation about how much longer this might go on. Those who remain adopt the stoic patience of commuters on a delayed train, resigned to their fate. The locals, by contrast, look unhurried and even faintly smug, as if knowing the secret, that boredom, endured communally and with a sense of higher purpose, is its own kind of blessing. The chants rise, then fall. The monks do not look at each other, nor do they look at the small audience tucked into the shadows. Their focus is on the Psalms, on antiphons centuries old, on ritual for its own sake, a practice sustained more by habit than passion, but not, you sense, without meaning. The ancient acoustics of the nave transform individual voices into a single, shimmering current, both immersive and inescapable. You find the lack of obvious beginning or planned conclusion strange at first, then oddly comforting. Here, there is no countdown to the end, only the slow unwinding of day into night, marked by voices joined in a pattern as natural as tides. A small thurible swings, its sweet smoke curling through the air. For a moment, the whole spectacle, candles, chanting, monochrome robes, drifting incense, achieves an unlikely beauty. It is a tableau constructed less for you than for an invisible audience. The generations of monks who have held this post, the saints whose names echo down the centuries, perhaps even the God for whom all this was once intended. Are you a participant in this, or merely a spectator trapped in someone else's ritual? The question floats unanswered above the choristers' heads. And yet, as another psalm begins, you feel yourself slipping briefly into the music's rhythm. The chant's monotony becomes its own kind of peace, like rain on a roof, unvaried but oddly reassuring in its persistence. Vespers ends at last, as unexpectedly as it began. Candles are snuffed, and monks vanish down shadowed corridors, their voices fading into silence. You walk outside into the evening, ears still echoing with sung Latin, trailing the faint conviction that maybe, just maybe, endurance can become transcendence, if only for a moment at dusk. Supper is light and resembles breakfast in all the saddest ways. Another round of silent, slow chewing, and trying to remember if you're supposed to be fasting today. Food is both penance and punishment. You might imagine that, after a day bookended by such culinary austerity, At least a night meal would offer comfort. But supper is not to be trusted. Here, bread dreams desperately of being butter, but it is not butter, and that's the tragedy. You eat toast, or perhaps just bread, left waveringly in the middle of the table, and stare at the congested silence of the room. There is no butter on the table. There's a promise of butter, maybe, some ancestral memory in the molecules, but only bread arrives, and only reluctantly. In the dim late evening, people gather at the table, weighed down more by habit than by hunger. The conversation, if it happens at all, is an ashen sprinkling of pleasantries. Each member casts furtive glances at the center, hoping that something, anything, might materialize that suggests abundance, or at the very least an upgrade from the beige ration at hand. The meal is a choreography of constraint, passing the breadbasket as if in hope that the next person may pull out a miracle, but knowing it will only ever be bread. There's an art to the melancholy of supper. It is less hunger and more nostalgia for food you almost remember. The tongue searches for decadence and finds instead gravity. Those who grew up with lavish family dinners can only assume supper was designed as an act of humility, or perhaps a joke played by time on the eager. You butter your bread metaphorically, with hope, with longing, with memory of fat, but in reality, it's dry. It's always dry. The ritual persists. Some sip tea, letting the tannins mingle with the carb-heavy dough, trying to coax flavor from the depths. Occasionally, someone offers jam as an apology for the absence of anything richer, but spreading thin strawberry over mealy white bread feels like pouring perfume on a regret. Sustenance exists in the margins, in the collective agreement not to complain, because, after all, this is just how things are done. You chew, you swallow. The process is slow, as if chewing might somehow conjure taste, or at least stave off the low tide of disappointment. If you're not alone, you look at the others chewing, each person lost in the internal struggle between gratitude and deprivation. Someone always jokes about wishing for even just a lick of butter, always to the groan of those who've heard it before. The joke, however, is hollow and lands somewhere between resignation and hope. Outside, the world is quietly closing shop for the day, and inside, your meal does the same. The plate empties, not quite by desire, but because supper is an obligation to the clock. Your mind drifts to tomorrow's breakfast, which will be inevitably the same. There is a humble kind of fullness in this cycle, a fullness born of learned restraint and managed expectations. In the end, when the meal is over, you realize supper isn't about indulgence, or even about food. It's about the echo of possibility and the acceptance that, this time, bread is just bread. You push your chair back, load the plates in the sink, and tell yourself, tomorrow, maybe, there'll be butter. But tonight, there is only bread, wishing, as we all do, to be something slightly more. The table is cleared, the silence resumes. Supper, humble and melancholic, has done its quiet work. On feast days, you might get a sliver of salted fish. It's a treat, meaning it only tastes slightly less depressing than the usual menu. You savor every bite as if it's illegal. Salted fish is, in theory, a reward. In practice, it's more of a signal flare to the tiny medieval voice inside you. Remember joy? Here's a brief, salty echo. The tang hits your tongue, sharply reminding you there's a world beyond watery gruel and day-old bread. But you don't dare linger too long on the sensation. Enjoyment, after all, is suspicious in these austere halls. If you start to like the fish, you're already dancing dangerously close to the edge of heresy, or at least, so they'd have you believe. Salt was expensive, and so was fish if you didn't live within nose-shot of a productive coastline. The humble combination was, paradoxically, both luxurious and penitential, enough to keep your spirits afloat, but never enough to trigger real pleasure. In the spiritual economy of the time, food wasn't supposed to be delicious enough to distract you from your soul's business. An eager, unrestrained bite could suggest gluttony, and gluttony, well, didn't that lead to all sorts of forbidden desires? Thus, the monks, those connoisseurs of ascetic caution, developed elaborate, unwritten rules. You could have the salted fish, but only in thin, nearly translucent slices, and only on days sanctioned by the calendar. Eat with enthusiasm. And you might as well confess now, before the abbot's eyebrows arch so high they merge with the rafters. That was the slippery slope of heresy. Not a dramatic, fiery betrayal, but a quiet, everyday affair, sprinting downhill on a sliver of salted herring. One moment you're grateful for a scrap of flavor. The next, you're contemplating whether the apocalypse might also involve butter. Of course, the rules about feasting and fasting became a battleground for church authorities and ordinary eaters. Dozens of synods and council meetings were dedicated to negotiating what was forbidden, what was reluctantly tolerated, and what could be slipped past God's notice if you mumbled grace quickly enough. Were whales, being warm-blooded but living in the sea, allowed during Lenten fasts? Can anyone reliably prove a beaver's tail is a vegetable? Every mouthful was fraught with theological implications. To outsiders, it might have seemed mad, so much debate over the thickness of a fish slice, the kind of salt used, or the exact time of sundown when temptation struck hardest. But to believers, these choices were daily skirmishes in a war for the soul. Salted fish was not only food, it was a test. How firmly did you hold the line between permitted pleasure and forbidden indulgence? Within this careful balancing act, people got creative. Recipes emerged for ultra-bland salted fish puddings, so wretched that the act of eating them became a spiritual mortification. Others seethed with secret rebellion, smuggling in exotic spices or taking suspiciously lengthy pauses during grace, waiting for their neighbor to nod off before sneaking a second taste. The desire for just a little more taste, more color, more life was always there, and every so often someone crossed that invisible line. The authorities pounced, dragging the unfortunate soul before their peers as proof that the path from savoring fish to selling your soul was indeed treacherously short. In the end, the salted fish made you more aware of both your hunger and your humanity. Every sliver was a lesson, a needle point between what you wanted and what you must deny yourself. Feast days were less about celebration and more about the complex gymnastics of showing, gratitude without drifting into dangerous enjoyment. And with every bite you were meant to learn, salvation lies somewhere between flavor and faith, and on the slippery slope, every meal is a test. Before bed, everyone gathers for the chapter meeting. Confessions are read out, mistakes are admitted, penances are assigned. It's like group therapy, but with less catharsis and more kneeling. The ritual is deceptively simple at first glance, thick with habit and thrift, lacking any dramatic flourishes or even the faintest whiff of forgiveness. The prior presides from his seat as judge, softly reciting from the community rulebook, while the rest of us await our turn to disclose today's personal failings. In the hush between admissions, the room seems to shrink, the walls heavy with shared imperfections and yesterday's unfinished penances. It's group accountability, equal parts tension and tedium, an ecclesiastical HR audit at the edge of the day. Surprisingly, the confessions tend to be less about grand, soul-shattering sins and more about minor acts of forgetfulness or sporadic lapses in monkish decorum. I failed to offer a proper greeting to Brother Paul after lauds. I allowed my mind to wander during vespers. I took the larger piece of bread at supper. The crimes are small, almost charming in their domesticity, but mentioning them aloud sharpens the edges of community life. There is solace here, a peculiar bond in collectively narrating our daily mediocrities. When my turn comes, I clear my throat and list my failures, feeling them stretch beyond the actual words, my impatience, my stifled laughter at the wrong moment, the way I stalled at the faucet in the kitchen. A few heads nod. They know the terrain. The prior listens, expression neutral but not unkind. His poker face honed by years of listening to transgressions with all the dramatic intensity of untying shoelaces. Penances are modest, extra chores, silent prayers, sometimes just a few minutes of solitary reflection in the chapel's chilly pews. Yet, these minute reparations matter. They are proof that the day is not just sand slipping through fingers, but something intentional, repaired and mended in small, persistent increments. The wisdom here is slow burning. No one expects revelation or sudden transformation, only honesty, and the dogged willingness to try again tomorrow. There are, of course, moments of dark humor, a necessary leavening. One brother, weary after a long week, recites all his infractions in a single exhausted breath, as though he could outrun the list if he only speaks fast enough. The prior gives him a rare smile. Another brother, having admitted he fell asleep during prayers, receives an extra turn ringing the refectory bell. a punishment that delivers its own punchline. Yet, beneath the surface humor and soft candlelight, there's a palpable vulnerability. This is the hour when the day's bravado falls away, when even the quietest monk admits to losing the plot. The ritual pulls us inward, monastic HR policy doubling as an existential roll call. Are you awake to your own life? It seems to ask. Are you present, paying attention in ways that count? As the confessions wind down, there is a curious atmosphere in the room, neither absolution nor outright condemnation, but a kind of gentle recalibration. Everyone stands a bit lighter, as if the accumulated dust of daily living has been brushed briefly from their shoulders. The prior delivers a last, unremarkable closing prayer, and the group disperses, some heading straight for bed, some lingering in chapel shadow, grateful there is another day to climb the same steep hill. Tomorrow, we'll gather again, same time, same room, same cast of imperfect characters. The cycle repeats, not for spectacle but for survival, each slow admission stitched together into the fabric of our communal, stumbling pursuit of grace. The evening air outside is already thick with stars, a reminder that whatever small mistakes we count here, the universe remains both indifferent and vast, leaving us to kneel, confess, and try gently to belong. The last prayer of the day. By now, you're so tired you can barely pronounce Amen. Candlelight flickers, shadows dance, and your mind drifts dangerously toward blasphemous thoughts. Is there such thing as too much prayer? You sit on a wooden bench that has become molded to your shape over time, your body echoing the fatigue of faithful repetition. The silence, so thick it almost hums, is broken only by the shuffle of habited feet and the soft rustle of robes. The chapel is cool but not cold, stones still holding the memory of daytime warmth, and you lean forward as the first familiar lines are recited, lips moving automatically. You've prayed these phrases so many times they're stitched into your bones. Sometimes you wonder if you're praying them or if they're praying you. This is the hour for inventory. The day's failures parade before your eyelids in shadow puppet form, the impatient glance, the careless word in the cloister garden, the half-hearted psalm. Every stumble feels magnified at night, as if the darkness soaks up daylight's little sins and returns them in clearer relief. If lauds is for hope, and vespers for gratitude, compline is for regret. A reckoning with the person you meant to be when the sun first rose, compared to the one sitting here now. The prayer leader's voice pulls you back. The examination of conscience, equal parts accountability and ritual self-flagellation. You try to recall today's mistakes in detail, not just for the sake of confession, but out of a perverse sense of thoroughness. An argument over library duties, the bread you took when no one was looking, that wandering, irreverent thought during none, when Brother Paul's snoring hypnotized you. Each remembered failing tugs at your tired heart, leaving you emptied out. Yet the liturgical words keep flowing, undeterred by your spiritual malaise. A wave of guilt, but also a strange comfort. You are not alone. Around you, everyone is equally weary, heads drooping, eyes glazed, hands making the sign of the cross as if underwater. You realize regret is not a solitary burden. It's woven into the ancient script of compline. The monks centuries ago were just as tired, just as fallible, probably also wondering how sincerely they managed their prayers at this hour. Who among them didn't nod off, mispronounce a word, lose track of a hymn? The universality of spiritual exhaustion becomes a kind of grace. Everyone present is failing together, and somehow that is enough. The flickering candle threatens to gutter, shadow stretching and snapping in rhythm with your thoughts. The room smells of beeswax and incense. It's a comfort and a rebuke, both gentle and relentless. At this hour, doubts slip through the cracks. Are these prayers washing anything away, or just repeating ancient motions, looping endlessly in circles like the orbit of the moon outside? You want absolution. You'd settle for peace. Instead, all you have is the reassuring monotony of words, the rhythm of breath, the warmth of bodies around you quietly enduring. Compline does not promise redemption. It merely acknowledges your regret, offering it up to the quiet dark, with a sigh or a whispered amen half swallowed by exhaustion. There's a peculiar hope to that, a belief that tomorrow, maybe, you'll love better, serve more sincerely, stay awake a little longer. For now, as you stumble back to your cell, regret hitching a ride on your shoulders, You trust that the act of praying, even with indifference or fatigue, is a kind of faith all its own. And so, the night deepens. Shadows retreat to their corners, prayers drift upward, and you, for better or worse, have made it to the end of another day. Bathing is rare and discouraged, in theory to cultivate holiness, in practice to cultivate a complex relationship with body odor. When it finally happens, it's closer to punishment than luxury. The rules regarding cleanliness seem clear. Spiritual purity, not physical comfort, takes precedence. Officially, abstaining from bathing curbs vanity and indulgence. Unofficially, it breeds a muted stoic camaraderie around the shared knowledge that everyone here, frankly, smells a little strange. The first few weeks I clung to the hope that my nose would simply shut down. Instead, it evolved into a sort of acceptance, a reminder that I, like everyone else, am composed of animal matter, sweat, and a surprising number of skin flakes. Bathing days are gruffly announced, unceremoniously by a senior. There's no rejoicing, there's no collective sigh of relief. Instead, there's a faint trace of dread. The chosen time is almost always inconvenient, either intruding upon the chill, silent pre-dawn, or inserted between the day's heaviest. Obligations when energy reserves are spent. The experience is functional, borderline penitential. One approaches the ancient battered metal wash basin with a feeling somewhere between embarrassment and resignation. There is an established system that aims to maximize privacy and minimize scandal. Thin curtains, careful turns, explicit avoidance of eye contact. At the heart of it, privacy is a fiction. The walls are never quite thick enough, the fabric never quite opaque. So everyone develops a respectful, exaggerated blindness to what's happening just out of sight. Bathing here is about getting clean without appearing to enjoy it. Water, of course, is always cold and dispensed with the stingy precision of a prison warden. There is soap, but its industrial issue, nearly scentless, and the color of surrender. The bravest scrub quickly and with fervor. Most simply daub and retreat, hunching against the literal and metaphorical chill. Towels are thin. The floor is always somehow damp, a reminder that comfort is not on offer, only the barest compliance with hygiene. The after effects are surprising. When you finish, there's an awareness almost like vulnerability, a sharp clarity in the senses, and a prickle on the skin from finally being rid of accumulated grime. Paradoxically, this clean sensation feels slightly illicit, as if you've stolen a rare pleasure. It won't last. Soon you'll slip back into the perfume of communal living, but for a brief moment, you're renewed. Conversations about bathing are conducted almost entirely in code. Someone might mention having taken care of things, or refer with a tragicomic sigh to the ordeal. Complaining is frowned upon. It disrupts the atmosphere of stoic unity. Yet, in quiet moments, novices trade stories about the peculiar indignities of the bath, the embarrassment of dropping the soap, the coldness seeping into your bones, the fleeting, shivery joy of wrapping in a dry towel. These stories always end with laughter. That's its own kind of cleansing, the communal rinse of communal misery. Over time, you come to recalibrate your relationship with cleanliness. The markers of success shift. A good day isn't a fragrant one. It's simply a day you bear your discomfort with dignity. The hierarchy of needs bends accordingly. Spiritual striving first, comfort dead last. Bathing ceases to be an act of self-care. It's a ritual, a reminder that even the body, so easily neglected in the name of higher pursuits, can't be ignored forever. This odd, unsatisfying approach to bathing encapsulates the larger ascetic logic of the place. One is never meant to feel too at ease. The discomfort is the point. A training ground for resilience, humility, and the quiet, understated solidarity of those who suffer together, even if only in the brief, bracing ordeal of a cold communal bath. Finally, you crawl into your straw mattress, which smells like centuries of regret. It's scratchy, noisy, and just drafty enough to remind you that windows in the 1200s didn't have glass. Sweet dreams, if you can find them. Let's pause and appreciate your sleep situation for a second. The bed is in fact an uneven sack stuffed with straw, more accurately described as a large, participatory hay bale. Forget the idea that medieval peasants ended their days in feathery bliss. No, this mattress is a living, breathing ecosystem, home to straw mites, mystery lumps, the occasional scurrying beetle, and, if you're extra lucky, a mouse or two claiming squatters' rights. Each movement sets off a symphony of rustles and crunches, punctuated by the faint, unidentifiable aroma of vintage barnyard. Lying in darkness, you try to find a spot that isn't poking you somewhere vital. Your body maps out every bump and knot beneath the thin linen sheet, until you start to wonder if this is medieval pain therapy. The communal room does little to comfort you. Beds line the walls, and every sigh, cough, and snore bounces around like an unwelcome lullaby. There's no privacy. Thin drapes maybe, if you're lucky, but mostly it's you, your family, and perhaps a passing chicken settling in for the night. Intimacy, medieval style, is sharing your REM cycle with everyone you know. Then there's the draft. Something modern sleepers rarely appreciate is the sheer devotion medieval homes had to circulating fresh, freezing air. Windows, when they exist, are gaping rectangles open to wind and rain, sometimes stuffed with oiled cloth or shutters. On most nights, though, those upgrades are for castles and churches, not your average thatched cottage. So you get a brisk breeze whispering over your face, stealing the last of your heat, and making the meager candle flicker in mockery on the far wall. If you're lucky, you have a wool blanket, heavy enough to feel like a mild punishment device, but thin enough to be valiantly ineffective against the onslaught. Sleep in the 1200s wasn't a single, blissful 8-hour stretch. The dark pressed in early, sometimes as soon as the animals stopped making noise outside. People often slept in two distinct shifts, first sleep and second sleep, with a wakeful period in the middle, filled with prayer, talking, or tending the fire. You may even wander outside to check the livestock, shivering under the pale light of a medieval moon, worrying about wolves, thieves, or night spirits, just as described by that old aunt swapping tales beside the kitchen hearth. You're not necessarily afraid of the night, but it feels much bigger than it does today. The village falls silent except for the call of an owl, the creak of timbers, the occasional whoosh of wind. Your senses feel sharp, awake to every sound and change in temperature. Could that be a rat by your feet? Hopefully just your imagination. But you roll away anyway. Sometimes your mattress feels as though it's trying to absorb you. You curl in tighter, knees tucked towards your chest, arms folded defensively. The straw seems to shift of its own accord. Pressure here, an icy gust there. Everything conspires to keep you aware of the world around you, humble before the elements, your comfort perpetually negotiable. Eventually, dawn threatens at the tiny window. You ache in places you didn't know could ache. Your bedmates stir. Somebody starts the fire. The room fills with the dull glow of coals, and you rise, dusting stray straw off your rough-spun shirt. Another night survived, bruised and grateful. You move toward another blessedly busy medieval day, already dreaming of upgrading perhaps to a mattress with fewer centuries of regret. Hidden amongst the monotony are the real stars of the abbey, barn cats and cheese-hustling mice. These creatures have freer lives than you, and probably get better snacks. Let's start with the barn cats. These feline celebrities glide around the abbey grounds with the quiet confidence of undercover royalty. After all, while the monks might spend hours in silent prayer, the cats spend hours in silent stalking. At mealtimes, the monks might scrape some porridge into a wooden bowl, but the cats are out back, lounging in shafts of sunlight, waiting for slow-witted mice, or, more likely, bits of cheese accidentally dropped by doting kitchen monks. Rumor has it, there's always at least one cat that's managed to get a cushion reserved right by the kitchen hearth, reserved only for special guests. The cats deny any knowledge of how this tradition started. But if the abbey's mice are the cheese hustlers, then nobody's told them they're supposed to be the underdogs of this story. Mice in a medieval monastery operate with a sneakiness matched only by their ambition. Every evening, while the monks are chanting vespers, these whiskered opportunists make their move. They dart across the refectory floors, pilfering stray crumbs, or, if they're bold enough, coordinating gravity-defying cheese heists. Some local legends claim that the cheese wheels occasionally move by themselves at night, but everybody knows these stories are mouse propaganda designed to cast suspicion on innocent monks. If you watch closely, the dances between the cats and mice are nothing short of epic. The cats, of course, play their part as natural pest control, but they've also developed a kind of begrudging respect for their rodent adversaries. There's no point in denying that sometimes the chase is more fun than the catch. The more imaginative monks like to say this rivalry is proof that even God's smallest creatures appreciate drama. Once, Brother Peter swore he saw a cat and a mouse eat from the same plate during Lent, but the abbot quickly hushed it up, citing theological confusion. Monastic dogs, on the other hand, serve a different function. Less interested in cheese and more in bounding around the garden, these four-legged residents follow the monks throughout their daily routines, radiating boundless enthusiasm. Have you ever tried conducting a solemn procession with a puppy tangled in someone's robe? The result is less sacred mystery and more slapstick comedy. Still, their barking turns to a hushed presence when it's time for contemplation. A tail thumping quietly against the choir stalls is, perhaps, the closest a dog can come to joining in on chants. It's said that a monastery's spiritual well-being can be measured by the number of dogs napping in the cloisters at any given moment. Far from being distractions, these animals are woven into the daily rhythm of monastic life. The monks, whose vow of silence often limits verbal conversation, exchange secret smiles over the unlikely friendships and petty rivalries of the abbey's animal population. Sometimes, at the end of a particularly long day, a shy novice will sneak a bit of bread to a kitten, or a respected elder will pause mid-sermon to shepherd a lost mouse back to the granary, pretending it's all just routine monastic business. These pets fill a unique role. They are both companions and gentle rebels. They break up the discipline with bouts of unpredictability, reminding everyone that even in a world of strict rules and daily rituals, the abbey still belongs a little bit to the wild things. When night falls and the chants subside, it's the soft purr of a cat, the skittering of tiny feet, or the snuffling of a dog under the altar that lets you know life at the monastery is never quite as quiet as it seems. End of section 24. Just as you're drifting off, the bells might ring again. You wonder what the monks dream about. Divine mysteries, or just a really nice blanket. Either way, sunrise is only a few hours away. Time to offer up your sleep for spiritual gain. In the cloister dark, the stone walls still cold from the day. Sleep comes in fits and starts. For the medieval monk, beds are wooden planks topped with sacks of straw, and blankets are only as thick as the abbey's budget allows. There's no gentle hum of an air conditioner, no memory foam pillow cradling a weary skull. Instead, every creak of ancient beams and whistle of wind becomes a reminder that comfort is an afterthought. That soft, slow drift into sleep is punctuated by a nagging anticipation. When will the next bell ring? Dreams, if they come at all, rarely stray into the realm of the fantastic. Instead of flying through clouds or winning imaginary tournaments, monks dream of simpler things. Perhaps finishing a psalm without stumbling, maybe a candle that doesn't sputter out mid-prayer, or the ultimate fantasy, waking up to find someone's already stoked the fire. In the more mischievous corners of their minds, maybe a rogue dream peeks through, a slab of cheese left untouched in the larder, or an extra hour allowed before matins. But sleep is neither deep nor dependable. Nightmares might swirl up, from the day's self-doubt, fear of dozing through a call to prayer, or the sharp spike of guilt for snoring too loudly during vigils. The tolling of the next bell haunts the liminal space between sleep and awake. No monk wants to be the last one in from the dormitory, hair askew and sandals on the wrong feet, caught by the stern stare of the prior. When the midnight bell tolls, sometimes called the poor man's alarm clock, all must rise. In pitch darkness, they shuffle silently, careful not to rattle the floorboards or jostle the slumbering bodies around them. There's a strange camaraderie in these half-conscious processions, the shared, silent grumbles, the muffled coughs, the way they move as a single, sleepy organism. No one likes being awake at this hour, and yet it's also a badge of discipline, a small act of solidarity through suffering. Meanwhile, back in your own bed, you might find yourself drifting, only to be jolted awake by a distant garbage truck or your neighbor's cat. Take note, not once will you be wrenched from sleep to stumble barefoot through freezing corridors for the sole purpose of chanting in Latin. It's an odd kind of luxury, this uninterrupted modern rest, a privilege monks only dreamed of, available to you each night, no penance required. And yet, Through this sparse sleep and constant schedule, the monks forged a resilience almost unimaginable today. Their nighttime wakefulness was not merely endurance, but a window into wonder, listening to the world hush, pondering the stillness, finding order where others found only dreariness. When dawn eventually colored the frosted glass, there was relief in the return to routine, a satisfaction in the simple act of having made it through to sunrise. So, as you snuggle into your soft, civilization-approved bed, take a moment to appreciate just how luxurious it is to have pajamas, silence, and the option to miss a morning meeting without fear of penance. The medieval monk's life was a routine built on self-denial, discipline, and the world's most dedicated schedule. Their days were filled with ritual, drafty stone, and lots, and I mean lots, of chanting. But under all that, they found meaning in the mundane and camaraderie in quiet suffering. Tonight, whisper a silent thanks for your thermostat, your hot showers, and your complete absence of unsalted gruel. Because history may have been strange, smelly, and unreasonably hungry, but it was also full of astonishing resilience, dry humor, and proof that people have always been just a little bit ridiculous. Good night, sleep tight, and may your dreams be chant-free. So, as you snuggle into your soft, civilization-approved bed, take a moment to appreciate just how luxurious it is to have pajamas, silence, and the option to miss a morning meeting without fear of penance. The medieval monk's life was a routine built on self-denial, discipline, and the world's most dedicated schedule. Their days were filled with ritual, drafty stone, and lots, and I mean lots, of chanting. But under all that, they found meaning in the mundane and camaraderie in quiet suffering. Tonight, whisper a silent thanks for your thermostat, your hot showers, and your complete absence of unsalted gruel. Because history may have been strange, smelly, and unreasonably hungry, but it was also full of astonishing resilience, dry humor, and proof that people have always been just a little bit ridiculous. Good night, sleep tight, and may your dreams be chant-free.